What has this Albanese government delivered to the people of Australia? Nothing at all. But three things stand out: higher cost of living, higher power prices, and sadly higher inflation, which means that families next year do not have an interest rate cut coming their way, and they quite possibly have an increase. And families in the lead up to Christmas are struggling. And can I tell you, when I leave here, when I leap off the stage and head to Tasmania to talk about forestry jobs, I have one thing in mind: there's a lot of people who are not getting a break this Christmas under the Albanese government. Shame on them. And what did we see on that last sitting day? We saw something called environmental laws. It's all very complicated to a lot of people, and it should be, because all it is green ink and red tape. But what it saw the rebirth of is the Labor-Greens alliance. It is back. It is back in force, and it is going to hold back the projects that we know this country needs. And you know what else it's going to do? It's not going to protect the environment. I want to make that very clear. It's going to hold back the one thing that will deliver our affordable, responsible energy plan: gas. And the reason why this is so important, members, is because many of you in this room are engineers, you understand the energy system. You know that Australians deserve affordable energy and responsible emissions reduction. We know that we can have both, but right now affordable energy must be a priority. But what have we got under Labor? A trifecta of failures: prices going up, reliability going down, and emissions flatlining. How does that make any sense? So we know too that this government has set targets it cannot meet at a cost that Australians cannot afford. All for nothing. $75 billion spent so far on the renewable energy transition, and the Business Council estimates that just to get to the 2035 targets, an eye-watering $530 billion. But within that, $150 billion of industries and businesses and manufacturers going offshore. There has to be a better way. And this plan is coming to a train station, town hall, forum, market square near you over the summer months, because the fight that we are having for Australians is about energy affordability and responsible emissions reduction, but it's about something that I know everyone in this room understands in their DNA, and that is we have to be a country where you make things. Remember the Prime Minister and all that made in Australia? Remember all that? He doesn't say it quite so much now. Maybe some of you remember 18 months ago there was this big future made in Australia push. $22 billion. With a government that's spending more and more of your money, there's always a big price tag. Anyway, I thought, I wonder how this is all going. I'll go on the Future Made in Australia website. I'll see who's getting this $22 billion. Well, the good news is, in one sense, no one is. But the bad news is that the number of projects funded under the Future Made in Australia, 0. Not a single one. Now they've set up a big bureaucratic thing called the front door. It's the front door, you go through there, you get your energy and emissions and projects and manufacturing and renewables, etc. You get it funded there. Not one single thing has been done. And the other thing is, the Future Made in Australia is still in the consultation phase, 18 months after it was announced. Shame on them. Shame on them. Now, not far from here, I stood at Tomago Aluminium a few weeks ago. I made sure that I stood in the same spot that the Prime Minister had stood in January this year. He said, pointing to Tomago Aluminium, this is what a future made in Australia looks like. There'll be green jobs and industry here for 40 more years. Now, you're New South Wales people and you love your state and you love the industries that it produces. So you will feel the sadness that I felt when I talked to the workforce whose manufacturing process is better than any other aluminium smelter in the world, because we do things really well in Australia. And the Tomago aluminium smelter was turned on in 1983. and it has run 24/7 since 1983. It has never turned off. You can't turn off a smelter. Imagine how we are all going to feel in 2028 when someone turns off the switch. Shame on them, because what we see there is a warning sign. Not just for metals manufacturing and smelters. I mean, this is the sixth one that's running up the white flag, heading for a bailout. There's no made in Australia, there's just a big bailout in Australia. But this sends a massive warning sign on energy and how this government has got it all wrong. Because if we don't make things in Australia, it's very simple, ladies and gentlemen, we make them somewhere else and they come to Australia as imports. Does the globe know any different? We know the emissions produced offshore are probably more than the emissions would be produced in Australia. But I am not going to stand here as the leader of this fine party and accept a future where we import plastics, aluminium, steel, cement, bitumen, nitrogen fertiliser. This is what's happening. We are losing our sovereign manufacturing capability under this government's energy policy. And it is frightening, and we have to fight it. And there is work to do, which is why this plan is coming to every single town hall, marketplace and train station near you. Because when I talk to Australians about this, they don't always realise. And then I talk about the next generation, because I have 6 grandchildren and I want them to inherit a better planet, and I want them to inherit a better standard of living. How dare this government talk about its so-called environmental credentials, as it did this week, you heard them, and say to the next generation of Australians, you will be poorer and worse off than your parents or grandparents. We will not stand by and let that happen, because that's where these policies, including energy, are heading. Back to the things we don't make in Australia anymore. It is absolutely shameful and shocking. And you can see what's happening to the price of houses. It's going up. In fact, it's going up by close to 30%, which means no one's building a new house. I mean, the price of new houses is going up by that much. They're simply looking at the existing stock of houses because while they're going up, they're not going up that much. But is it any surprise that the cost of houses is going up when the structural shell of the house is more and more in an imported supply chain? That makes no sense. The bitumen that paves the roads of the new estate, the plastic, because we don't make HDPE and LDPE. These are the plastics you find in packaging, in bottles, in agriculture, in construction. We don't make them in Australia at all. They're all coming in on a boat, and you know where they're coming from. So if we look at that house again, glass. Well, we make windows in Australia, but we don't make glass. We don't make glass in this country, no architectural glass. So all of the windows that go into these new houses come on a boat, usually from China. And of course, that adds to cost, and sometimes we're not the first person in the supply chain. And as we saw during COVID, when the supply chain is disrupted, it gets pretty awful. And you all know I'm a pilot, so I'm interested in surfaces and bitumen, and we don't make runway grade bitumen in this country anymore. We import it all. If we had to build airports in a hurry, I don't know what we would do. We don't even have the IP and the operation to do that. And increasingly, more and more bitumen is coming on a supply chain imported in a warm sort of boat because you can't let it get cold. I despair. Cement. The building blocks, members, the building blocks of a modern civilised society are not made in Australia anymore. I looked at the port of Kwinana recently. They were making a big song and dance. They're opening some new terminal. Oh, I thought, what's going on here? They're importing clinker. You know, we make clinker, we used to make clinker here. What's in clinker? It's the ingredient of cement. Limestone and clay, and of course energy, gas or thermal coal. But no. Under this government's energy policy, the manufacturers are being punished for their emissions, so we're now building new import terminals to import clinker to make cement. The building blocks of a modern civilised society are not here anymore. They're on a supply chain from somewhere else. And ladies and gentlemen, if you just think of the precariousness of our economy on this alone, you know there is really something to fight for with this. I said to the Prime Minister this week, what happened to your Made in Australia? And I got no answer. I'm saving maybe the best till last because I'm a farmer, and hands up any farmers in this room. I can see Noel Wilson sitting over there and the great crew from Farrer. Well, imagine what the architects of the Green Revolution in the middle of last century would say if they knew the facts about nitrogen fertiliser, which contains urea, which of course uses a lot of energy. 80 to 90% of our nitrogen fertiliser is imported from the Middle East and other locations. Imagine the carbon miles on that trip. So we have food production put at stake. We are risking the real things that we do well in this country, and all for what? For an ideological target, a target that they can't meet at a cost Australians can't afford. And yes, we want responsible emissions reduction. And I've talked to young people, including my children's generation. I've said, yeah, I care about the next generation. I care about the planet. That's why I want emissions reduction to actually work, which is why our plan talks about that too. It's affordable energy and responsible emissions reduction. It's exactly what this government is not doing. Now, there's so much going wrong with the Albanese government right now, and it's not just energy policy. At the heart of the agenda that you see in front of you is something that is, of course, the biggest spending since Whitlam, and by comparison, maybe even bigger than that. And again, I've talked, some of the statements I've made so far, the very first one I made as leader was about how we manage the budget responsibly, how we live within our means. And I know a lot of younger Australians have got used to debt as being just a big number that doesn't really mean very much. But when you consider that we're spending $50,000 a minute in interest on the debt, on the national credit card, then you know they've got it all wrong. A $1.2 trillion debt in the 28-29 year. And I talked about empowerment versus dependency, because the country that I want to see Australia be, the country I know Australia really is not one where the citizens look to government and say, what can you do for us? It's one where the government says to the citizens, how can we empower you? How can we support you to be the generators of industry and growth and small business and the private sector and build a future for your families? How can we do that? But that's not what this government is doing. It's simply sitting there passively, borrowing more and more money, being very generous with borrowed money. Now, I also made a statement about personal income taxes going down, and that's a solid commitment that I have made, because it comes from my own experience. And many of you know that when I was learning to fly, I did several jobs. I was pretty interested. By the time I got to the second and third job, the tax rate was sort of through the roof. And I thought, I'm not keeping more of what I earn. What's going on here? And then I went to work in the shearing sheds of Western Queensland and saved all my money. My husband and I saved all our money for a start on the family farm. And we loved to see that little nest egg grow, but then we saw it attacked by a very high tax rate. But it is about reward for effort. It is about a government that rewards its citizens, doesn't punish them. So every time you see the government talk about a generous piece of new spending, borrowing more of your money, you can know that we will allocate it to either budget repair or lower personal income taxes. That's my commitment. Because remember, every dollar that Labor spends is a dollar that you have to pay. And I want to put that dollar back in your pocket. So you decide. So you decide what you spend it on. Because you know what? When you decide what you spend it on, you do a whole lot better than the government does. And so many of you, and I'm so grateful because I know your experience in small business, and that's taught me a lot. My small business was a farm, but there are many small businesses. They work incredibly long hours. They stand there with a smile on their face as a business proprietor from dawn to dusk. There's not that many people walking through the door with money to spend. We understand that. It's tough. But as one business owner said to me, then I get home and I have to do all this paperwork. And I don't understand, because if I could see the link between the paperwork and something, but I don't. And the feeling is that this government wants to punish me. This is what our small business, our wonderful small businesses say. And that's not good enough. So we're going to do better for small business. We're going to get rid of their red tape. We're going to deregulate. We're going to support them. We're going to listen to them, and we're going to understand that it all comes down to people walking in the door of that small business with money to spend. And right now, they don't. Because this is a government that thinks that Canberra has to be all things to all people. But we know that government should set the rules.
All right, the Liberal conference there in New South Wales with opposition leader Sussan Ley, and certainly she spoke about Labor having the higher cost of living, higher power prices and higher inflations, and as a result the families next year certainly have a high possibility of interest rate rises throughout the year. We also are a country where we make things for the generations to come, Sussan Ley said, and the Liberals are calling for affordable energy and responsible emissions reduction. We'll have more on that conference in an hour's time.